Hello, everyone. I'm going to try to go quickly through this, but if you are, confused about what you're looking at, this is the poetry that we are starting with our poetry explication project. So if you are an AP Lit, you know that these are the 4 poems that you need to use as a primary document in your research essay. So I'm going to go through all 4 poems. I'm going to try to spend 5 minutes or less on each poem. We'll see how that goes. But I hope to bookmark them so you can jump to the poem that you need to jump to. All right, so we're going to start with the first one, and then we're going to proceed through there. So let's go ahead and get started on all of that. All right, so our first poem here is La Belle Dame Sans Merci. You're going to have to pardon my French if I don't say it well. I think I say it all right. But this is an example of British Romanticism. So we can add that here. This is British Romanticism. This is obviously, Keats is our poet right here. You're looking at 1819. And this poem translates, the title translates into the beautiful lady without pity, mercy, and either of those is going to be fine here. She has no mercy. She's sort of cold-blooded. So it tells you straight out of the gate that this is a ballad. A ballad is the poetic form here. In this poetic form, you have a refrain. It sort of feels like a song. It's going to tell a story. And this is actually what Keats is doing here. So he's writing in the 1800s, but what he's doing here is hearkening back to an earlier time with what we refer to as a British lay. A lay is a type of sort of sing-songy poem that was typically about sort of medieval things, knights and princesses and damsels in distress and those kinds of things. Very fairy tale-ish feeling, but it's a very medieval tradition. So it's coming out of that. So it does sort of feel like a ballad, but technically we're looking at this as a British lay. It's very old, even by the time Keats comes along, and he's hearkening back to that earlier tradition. It would be like if you had a song today, say for instance Beyonce's Jolene, and she does a different sort of twist on it than the original Dolly Parton version, but it's the same sort of tradition, but times have changed a little bit, so they're doing things a little bit differently. So Keats is hearkening back to this early medieval tradition, but he's going to emphasize a little bit different than maybe what they would have emphasized. Now, one thing that I do note for my students when we talk about this is that when this woman is described as a fairy's child, in British mythology, it's very different, our ideas of fairies and elves. So in British mythology, fairies and elves are not Tinkerbell, and they are not Santa elves. They are typically tall, beautiful, dangerous, non-human. They're like creatures more than anything. They're infamous for stealing people away to fairyland, and they would just be gone forever. So they would kidnap children, they would kidnap artists, they would kidnap beautiful women, beautiful men, they'd just be gone forever. So when we talk about fairies in sort of British literature, we are not talking about Tinkerbell. We are talking about something dangerous. Okay, so I'm jumping into this really quickly because I'm at 3 minutes. Okay, so in the first 3 stanzas here, we have an unnamed narrator. And then we have the rest of this is going to be from the point of view of, he says he's a knight-at-arms, so he's some sort of gentry, some sort of like nobility, something here. And we get, oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. So this is telling us essentially that it's fall, because the sedge, like all the plants are dead, the birds aren't singing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? So we get a repetition of that question. The squirrel's granary is full and the harvest done. So again, it's fall, and your unnamed narrator is asking, hey, what's wrong? He's met a guy in the woods, they're out for a walk, and he sees this guy, and the guy looks terrible. He looks sad, he looks ragged, he looks wrecked. And then unnamed narrator says, I see a lily on my brow with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too. And so when he says a lily on his brow, lilies are typically white, so he says this guy's really pale. He has anguish moist and fever dew, so he's like sweaty. He's like fevery sweaty. And then on his cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too, so his cheeks are red. And so if you put all that together, this guy is sick. I apologize. So this knight seems sick. Now, it's not too far a stretch to say, okay, well, the symptoms that the unnamed narrator is describing here are very similar symptoms to someone who has tuberculosis, which shockingly is what Keats died from.
To the front office, please. Christopher Castillo Marino, Jaden Burris, James Booker.
Thank you, thank you. Right here. Would you close that behind you, baby?
The door?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, we got interrupted. Okay, so so tuberculosis. Keats actually dies of tuberculosis at the age of 25. His years are 1795 to 1821, dying of tuberculosis. So I don't think it's any far reach to say what he's describing here is what Keats in his day and time, because everybody was dying of tuberculosis in the 17 and 1800s, is very much stereotypical sick. Like, this is what a sick person would have looked like, because everybody had TB. Everybody. And so he looks sick, and it's very similar to what a TB patient would look like in this day and time. All right, so now we get these words from the knight. We're going to get his story. And he says, I met a lady. Well, of course. It always starts with a lady, right? He says, I met a lady in the meads, the field, full, beautiful, of fairish child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. It says when her foot was light, she's like dancing and jumping around and cavorting and that kind of thing. She's got long hair, she's got crazy eyes, she's dancing around. Absolutely, she sounds like a lovely individual. It says, I made a garland for her head and bracelets too in fragrant zone. So he's making like a chain flower, like a flower chain, and he puts it on her head and her bracelets and maybe around her neck or her waist. It's unclear what he means by fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love and made sweet moan. I'm going to point out that she doesn't speak. She just makes noises, which is strange. I set her on my pacing steed. This is a horse. And nothing else saw all day long, for sidelong she would bend and sing a fairy song. So she doesn't speak, but she does sing. And if we're remembering our proof rock in our Odyssey, we know that singing can be a sign of danger. If a lady is singing at you, dudes, it's a sign of danger sometimes. So siren-esque kind of behavior here. She found me roots of relish sweet and honey wild and manna dew. Okay, so she gives him things from the woods to eat. She feeds him like stuff from the woods. Don't eat things from the woods, guys. And sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. Oh, she says that she loves him. Wait. He says, and sure in language strange. This means that he doesn't know what she's saying. Her language is strange. She's speaking a different language. He doesn't know what she's saying. He just assumes that she's saying, I love you. He makes an assumption. She took me to her elven grot. This is her elf house. So she takes him to her house. And there she wept and sighed full sore, and I shut her wild, wild eyes with kisses for. All right, so she takes him to her house and just bursts into tears. She starts crying. And he kisses her to make her happy or stop her crying or something. And there she lulled me asleep. So they go to sleep. And there I dreamed, ah, woe betide. When we get, ah, woe betide, this is like a, oh no kind of situation. He's very dramatic in that moment. And he has a dream. The latest dream I ever dreamt on the cold hillside. So here's the dream. So he's going to have a dream, and then he tells us what the dream was about. This is very common in romantic poetry to have like dream sequences, or for them to wake up and be like, oh, I had a dream of a poem, and they'd write the poem down. So they're very like romanticized image of dream. But his dream, I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La belle dame sans merci, thee hath enthrall. To be enthralled to something is to like be under its spell. So if you're in thrall, you are under someone's spell. They have control over you. So he dreams of these kings and these princes and these warriors, and they're all pale, like, you know, he is now pale. And they're like, oh no, she's got you. She got you under her spell, like she's some kind of spider. He says, I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide. So they're like, they're hungry. And I awoke and found me here on the cold hillside. I think you're supposed to get the image that they are, that they want more of her. Like they're hungry for her affection. They're hungry for whatever it is. Like she's ruined them in some sort of sense. He's like, oh, I woke up and she was gone and the house was gone and everything's gone. I don't know where she went. Like I awoke and found me here on the cold hillside. This is your original sort of cold shoulder, like kind of thing. And this is why I sojourn here. And this is why I sojourn here. So all of this stuff that he's told us, that's why he's wandering the countryside, just sort of sad and pathetic and sick. And you're supposed to, again, get the impression that he's wandering in hopes of finding her, but he's wandering sort of futilely for this thing he can never have again, which pretty much goes along with what fairies would have done. They would have like taken you and shown you wonders and greatness, and you would not be able to sort of come back from that. You would never want humans would no longer be good enough for you. So he's ruined, essentially. This love has ruined him. All right, so I'm jumping. Woo! Let's talk about Out Out. All right, let's get a different sort of feel and vibe here as we talk about Out Out. Okay, so number one, this is Robert Frost. He is writing, I'm going to reset my timer real fast. He is writing 1894 to 1963. He is an American poet, so we call this American realism. That's your genre. It would help if I could spell correctly on camera, right? All right. Written in about 1916. That doesn't sound right. All right, hold on a second. It comes 1916. Originally published in 1916. Okay, I should have doubted my notes. Okay, so we get that this is the thing that you're going to need to know about this is that this is written in blank verse, and the blank verse is its poetic meter. And if you have no clue what that means, it's okay. We're going to get there. And that typically blank verse is something we very much see in Shakespeare. And that's kind of odd here because you have a poem that is very much Americana. You got a family cutting wood with a saw. Very Appalachian Americana. It's in Vermont here, and it's fun because Frost has written about this event that's very down home country, but he's doing it in the same way that Shakespeare would do it, which just goes to show sort of the flexibility and the commonness, the generalizability of Shakespeare's sort of form here, this blank verse form. To sort of continue on that, because I'm not making this out of nothing, you have Out Out, which should be in quotation marks because it is a line from Shakespeare. Specifically, it's a line from Macbeth. Lady Macbeth says, "Out, out, damn spot." She has participated in the murder of someone, and in this participation, she has gotten blood on her hands, and it has been too much for her fragile little mind, and she has sort of shattered, and she wanders the castle at night, wringing her hands and trying to wash this blood off. There's no blood on her hands. It's all in her head. It's all figurative blood, not literal blood. And so she wanders around going, out, out, damn spot. She's referencing the blood that's on her hands, but not on her hands. So you have here Frost going, hey, I'm writing like Shakespeare, but I'm using a line from Shakespeare too. Subtle dude, clever dude. So essentially, I'm going to read through this poem, and then I'll talk about it as quick as possible. The buzzsaw snarled and rattled in the yard and made dust and dropped stove-linked sticks of wood, sweet-scented stuff when the breeze drew across it. And from there those that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other, under the sunset far into Vermont. And the saw snarled and rattled, snarl and rattled, as it ran light or had to bear a load, and nothing happened. Day was all but done. Call it a day, I wish they might have said, to please the boy by giving him the half hour that a boy counts so much when saved from work. His sister stood beside him in her apron to tell them supper. At the word, the saw, as if to prove saws knew what supper meant, leapt out at the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given the hand, however it was. Neither refused the meeting. But the hand! The boy's first outcry was a rueful laugh as he swung toward them, holding up the hand, half in appeal, but half as if to keep the life from spilling. Then the boy saw all. Since he was old enough to know, big boy doing a man's work, though a child at heart, he saw all spoiled. Don't let him cut off my hand, the doctor, when he comes. Don't let him, sister. So, but the hand was gone already. The doctor put him in the dark of ether. He lay and puffed his lips out with his breath. And then the watcher of the pulse took fright, and no one believed. They listened at his heart, little, less, nothing, and that ended it. No more to build on there. And they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs. All right, so you have a pretty straightforward story here. Essentially, this is about a boy who gets his hand cut off and bleeds to death. So you have this tragic sort of monologue here, this tragic sort of narrative monologue, which, by the way, I didn't write that, but your poetic form is a narrative. So you get here this beautiful like setting, a lot of like rich imagery happening here. And then you have, throughout this poem, you have examples of zoomorphism, because sometimes the saw is sort of described as an animal, like it's snarled and rattled and snarled, very, very animalistic. Sometimes it seems like the saw is personified, where it says like, oh, it, as if to prove saws knew what supper meant, like you could hear and understand human speech. Pay attention to this part down here, where how the hand sort of wound up in that saw blade. But with this poem, I would be really careful to not take it too lightly, because Frost is incredibly subtle. So as opposed to the previous poem, La Belle Dame Sans Merci, where once you know the plot, that's pretty much what Keats is getting at. He is doing something very, very sort of traditional, but he's not hiding anything. It's not subtle. All of his ideas are sort of out in the front. Frost has got some really subtle moments in here with his blank verse, with his allusions, with his images, with his sound devices. If you just look at the first line, the buzzsaw snarled. Like, look at the S's and that sibilance, and you get the sweet stuff sent to the breeze drew across. All those S's here, a lot of sound devices at work in this particular poem. Really, really beautifully done. Like, you can see why Frost is sort of a master of his field when you get to talking about poetry. But Frost is the one where he's going to give you this really upfront image, like here is the image, here is the thing I'm describing. Very, very traditional Americana kind of stuff. And then he's going to be subtle about something. He's going to twist a phrase, or he's going to write something in a specific way. There's always more than meets the eye when you're talking about Frost. He's a very tricksy kind of guy, but he's a master of his craft. Not to sell Keats short, like Keats is a master of his craft as well. It's just that the way they're doing things is different. And Keats has poetry that is also incredibly subtle. I just don't think that La Belle Dame Sans Merci is subtle. This out tricksy, very much so with, you have this, like I said earlier, this down-home country kind of traditionally but dramatic moment, but he's linking it from the onset, he's linking it to Shakespeare. So the Shakespearean drama of this moment, the Shakespearean tragedy of this moment it crosses time and boundaries and continents, and all of humanity understands the tragedy of this moment, the tragedy of an accident. All right, that was only 8 minutes. Let's move to Mirror, Mirror, or just Mirror. All right, Miss Plath. All right, trucking right along here. Okay, so when we talk about Plath, we have modern American. Yes, 3 of these 4 poets are American. That was only mildly my choice. I'm much more a British poetry kind of individual. Plath is famous, infamous, very much for committing suicide. She commits in 1963 at the age of 30. She is of this era of 1950s, 1960s housewives that very much sort of feel stifled and controlled by the positions that they're allotted in life. She wanted to be more than a wife. She wanted to be more than a mother. She wanted to write and pursue her passions and her art, and there just wasn't an opportunity very much for women to do that in the 50s and the 60s. So you do have a sort of epidemic of these women who are sort of fighting for equality and rights and sort of being pigeonholed into this path for them and being very unhappy with that, wanting to pursue an education, wanting to pursue a career, wanting to pursue an art, and not many of them having that option. Women couldn't have bank accounts in most of the United States until the 1970s. They couldn't have a bank account without a man helping them open one. So it was very much the stifling feel for Sylvia Plath, which eventually led to her depression and sort of the final end of that, especially if untreated. And they weren't treating women's depression at all. They would label a woman as hysterical, and that was pretty much it. Like there was no real help offered to these women. So you get something that we refer to as confessional poetry from Sylvia Plath, and not just her. Other women at the time are writing it as well. A lot of sort of self-reflection, confessing feelings. Like these are some of the first people to really mention that marriage is not fantastic and that being a mother is not easy. And nowadays we're like, yeah, no, absolutely, we understand that being a mother is a very, very difficult job. But in the 60s, the 50s and the 60s, you were just supposed to like, oh, it's the greatest thing ever. I love my children. It's wonderful. And when it's not, you don't talk about it. And so you get a lot of this poetry that is showing you sort of the darker sides of being a human being, which I believe in our current society we've embraced a little bit more of. Like not everything is great, and it's okay to talk about things, and you should talk about things, but in the 50s and the 60s you did not. So poetry is coming to the aid of these women here as they're trying to be cathartic and get these emotions out. This poem takes the form of a lyric. It's a lyric poem. Most of this is a personification of a mirror, as the title suggests, or a reflective surface. And I don't know that Sylvia Plath would have said self-reflective poetry and then this is a reflective poem, but it's doing that. There's reflection here in both senses, like of emotional reflection, but also of physical reflection. All right, so in our first stanza, we get Her first stanza, I am silver and exact, I have no preconceptions, whatever I see I swallow immediately, just as it is, unmisted by love or dislike. I am not cruel, only truthful, the eye of a little god four-cornered. Most of the time I meditate on the opposite wall, it is pink with speckles. I have looked at it so long I think it is part of my heart, but it flickers. Faces and darkness separate us over and over. Okay, so here in this section, this is the mirror speaking. And it speaks about the thing that it sees most often. Like it reflects the opposite wall. So think about your bathroom mirror, what it looks at 99.9% of the time. It's probably a wall. So it's reflecting this opposite wall. And then occasionally there's this flicker. The lights come on, the lights go off. Think about your bathroom mirror. And faces and darkness separate us over and over. So the faces are those people that come between the mirror and the wall, you know, as you do to go into a mirror. And then the darkness, we flip off the light, we leave the room. So this is, if you imagine a day in the life of your bathroom mirror, here you go. That's what we're getting at. Which is a rather mundane image that Plath elevates to another level here when you get to thinking about, I'm not cruel, only truthful. The mirror can only show you what's there. It's not going to lie to you. It's going to show you the truth. And if you're getting like mirror, mirror on the wall kind of vibes here when the evil queen says, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, and the answer's not her, and she flips out, that's kind of what we're getting at here, is I can't tell you a lie. I can only show you the truth. I'm not cruel. I'm not meaning to be mean. I'm only truthful. Unmisted by love or dislike. It just is. Now I'm a lake. So now we go from being a mirror to now we're a lake. Now I am a lake. A woman bends over me, searching my reaches for what she really is. So still reflective, where she's still looking at the water. Then she turns to those liars, the candles or the moon. I see her back and I reflect it faithfully. So when she turns away to look at the candles or she turns away to look at the moon, the pond still shows her what she looks like. Like it's being reflected faithfully. She rewards me with tears and agitation of hands. So obviously she doesn't like what she sees in the water. I am important to her because she keeps coming back. She comes and goes. Each morning it is her face that replaces the darkness. So when you get this like, in me she has drowned a young girl, and in me an old woman rises toward her day after day like a terrible fish. Okay, so we're not really a lake. We're still a mirror. But we're pretending now to be a mirror who's pretending to be a lake. It's a complicated but beautiful image here. And in me she has drowned a young girl. And in me, an old woman rises toward her day after day. So if you think about a mirror and like it sees you every single day, it sees you as you age. So in the mirror, you have placed a young girl, but that girl is never coming back. The next day it's a slightly older girl, and the day after that it's a slightly older girl, and then the day after that it's a grown woman, and the day after that it's a slightly older woman. So you see this progression of time in this mirror rising up over and over and over again, and she can't help it. She's so upset. And we go back to this idea of the candles or the moon. Think about if you're taking a picture, just full flash, boom, picture of your face, and you're like, that's my face. Woo. Okay, now what if you turn the lights down, you take the flash off, you light a candle, maybe it's a bright moon night, and you take a picture. You're like, whew, that's a better picture. Why is it a better picture? Because the lighting has changed. You have manipulated that picture just like you would put a filter on a photo or a social media post. You've manipulated it. It's not the truth. But it does make you feel better for a moment. But the mirror gets tears and agitation. And just a quick note, if this is something that, like, this is a poem that you might you're going to want to look up Plath's husband, Ted Hughes. He was a British poet, just a couple years older than her, published, all these sorts of things. Their relationship was not healthy. She alleges that he abused her. He definitely stifled her creativity. He definitely held her in check. He definitely kept her from her artistic freedoms. He was definitely cruel to her, to the extreme of like cheating on her while she's recovering from car accidents, that kind of thing. Not a good guy. But if you're going to learn about Plath, you're going to want to mention her husband as a major motivating factor in her poetry, in her art, but also in the continual combat she had with her own mental health and her art as a whole. All right, let's talk about Weary Blues. Almost done. Okay, so Langston Hughes, Weary Blues. I am not going to read this because I can't do the rhythm of this poem justice. I can definitely post a video of a person reading it way better than I ever could. So that's pretty much how I look at this. I'm trying to find my notes on the Weary Blues. There's Mirror. There's Out. Here we go. Nope, that's still Out. Oh, I don't know where my notes are. Okay, well, I can go. Oh, here they are. Boom, found it. Okay, so, all right. We've got another American poet here. This is Langston Hughes. If you don't know anything about Langston Hughes, shame on you. You should. He is one of the most famous and well-recognized poets, African-American poets, of all time. What he does with like rhythm and meter and imagery is just at a different level than everybody else. So you're looking at a poem written about 1925, which is, I guess makes it our most modern poem of this bunch. No, Mirror was 61. Okay, sorry. And so you get, this is coming out of the Harlem Renaissance. It is, if you don't know the Harlem Renaissance, I can't teach you the entirety of that in this particular video, but the real fast version is the Harlem Renaissance is a resurgence and explosion of Black American art in all of its forms, short stories, novels, poetry, music, plays, musical theater, visual art, photography, all forms of art sort of exploding out of the Harlem, New York area in the 20s. Jazz, just being a huge thing, and for the first time in American history, that being acceptable. And sort of mainstream America going, hey, this art is really good, this art is interesting, this art is sort of cutting edge. Well, it's not cutting edge necessarily for the community that was creating it, but it is definitely cutting edge for the modern American audiences that are hearing it for the first time. And it is changing the way that music is done, the way that art is done, the way that poetry is done, and it definitely is a moment in American history where we are sort of growing an art form in a really unique and wonderful way. Okay, so this is another lyric poem. You get, that's the type of poem it is. It is written in free verse, but more specifically than that, because when we say free verse, sometimes we just sort of think like all over the place, but this is definitely written with a specific kind of beat to it. It has a very jazz sort of staccato sound to it, which is one of the reasons that if I read it, I'm not going to do it the justice that it needs to be done. This is not my strong suit of literary criticism. I'm a British romantic. I can hang with Frost, like I know him. I can do some Plath. I know Hughes. I know his poetry well, but it's not a place that I feel. It's not my expertise. But I can tell you, a high school kid, I can tell you enough to get you started so that you can become an expert. Okay, so we have this. There's a lot of jazz terminology in here, so musicality. And that's one of the things that Hughes is incredibly famous for, is sort of the musicality of his verse. Just the way that he's playing with song and rhythm and beat. If you don't scan these lines, you definitely should. He is going to do a lot with imagery. He's going to do a lot with onomatopoeia. I gotta spell it. Onomatopoeia. He's going to do a lot with that sort of that stop and go kind of 3/4 sort of jazz beat kind of time. So my music people, if you are in band, if you are in jazz band, or if you just are a lover of jazz and you know the sort of the jazz time signature, that swing beat kind of feel, you're going to see that here. That's in poetry as well. Just the rhythm and the rate of that. So look at your sound devices if you're choosing this as the poem to sort of talk about sound devices. Look at this first line: droning a drowsy syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon. Like, it's just so like, I can't deliver it the way it needs to be delivered, but if you're looking at those sound devices, so pretty, so like on beat, such a nice way of doing this. So what is this poem about? This poem, in sort of simplistic terms here, is you've got a narrator, an unnamed speaker who is listening to a black blues musician playing in a bar late at night. And the musician seems to be playing something that he calls the Weary Blues. So when he says the Weary Blues, you get this idea that these blues are they're about sort of the racism that the singer, not the speaker, the singer meets every day, and just sort of the continual perpetuity of feeling those things over and over and over, and that's sort of why he's weary. He's not weary from the work, he's not weary from his day, he's weary from these experiences that he has over and over and over again. So that's sort of the daily grind, sort of daily struggles, daily racism. And if you're thinking about the 20s, I mean, probably so. One of the images that I think is just so pretty in this poem is you get this right here, where you have with his ebony hands on each ivory key. Having ebony and ivory to mean a piano is not a new image, because the black keys were typically made out of jet or ebony or something along those lines, because they're black keys. And the white keys were typically made out of ivory before that was made illegal. But here, instead of saying ebony and ivory to mean the keyboard, he's saying ebony to mean the musician playing the keyboard. So you get this beautiful image of his hands as part of the instrument as well, like they are so finely connected. I just think that's such a pretty image, and that's one of the reasons that Hughes is just a master of an image. He is an absolute master of capturing the sound of poetry, with the rhythm and the rate and the meter that he uses. That's why you have to hear somebody who knows what they're doing say this. And I will try to post a link to that in the comments of this video. But I hope that has helped a little bit. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Bye.